In the Gospels, we read of Jesus, the Messiah and King, who fulfilled the promises made throughout the Old Testament. Jesus first came to establish a new covenant and inaugurate a new kingdom as its king. He declared the message of his kingdom to his disciples, the crowds, and his adversaries. Jesus will one day return personally and bodily at a time none of us knows. And upon his return, he will deliver the fully consummated kingdom to his Father. Until then, Christians live as citizens of his kingdom, and the church exercises his authority and acts on his behalf. Local churches gather together around the world as embassies to declare the king's judgment and his terms of peace to a rebellious world. When these local churches, these embassies, gather together, they point to their king. The preaching of the king's words is central to their gatherings. They sing his word, pray his word, read his word, and see his word in baptism and the Lord's Supper. In Matthew 28, our King commissioned us to make disciples of all nations until he returns, publicly identifying them as citizens of his kingdom through baptism and teaching them how to live as his ambassadors. For 2,000 years since that great commission was given, Christians have been sharing the gospel of Jesus Christ throughout the world. From the establishment of the very first church in Jerusalem, Christians have been evangelizing, seeing new believers gathered into local churches, baptized, discipled, equipped, and sent out to establish more churches in neighborhoods across town and among language groups around the world. Embassies of the King send out ambassadors of the King to far-off places to tell of his good news. Paul and Barnabas were sent out by the church in Antioch, and we know from the pages of Acts and much of the rest of the New Testament that Paul was instrumental in the establishment and strengthening of a number of churches. We read of Paul's evangelism in the synagogues and in Athens. We read of his discipleship of younger leaders like Titus and Timothy. We see his desire to strengthen local churches in his letters to Galatia, Ephesus, Philippi, Colossae, and Thessalonica. We know Paul worked in the major cities of his day, like Rome and Corinth. In his letter to the Romans, we read of his desire to travel to Spain so that he could make the king known where his goodness had not yet been proclaimed. The Apostle Paul evangelized, established churches, discipled and strengthened leaders. He did this in major cities, and he desired to do it as well in places where the gospel had not yet been preached. Jesus is returning, and his citizens will one day gather around his throne and worship him. Citizens from every tribe, tongue, and language gathered around his throne. At Reaching and Teaching, we desire to come alongside local churches to help them send missionaries to do the same kingdom activities that we've seen ambassadors like the Apostle Paul, Patrick of Ireland, George Lyle, William Carey, and Elizabeth Elliot do for over 2,000 years. We'd love to partner with your local church to make mature disciples, establish healthy churches, and train local leaders around the world. We desire to see Jesus exalted amongst every tribe, tongue, and language. Our King is worthy. Let's get to work.